I'm excited about this. We could talk about this all day. I am not a programmer. I just want to put that out there. I'm not a developer. I have been around this stuff for quite a while, and probably not as much on the generative AI side as in other realms, but we're going to touch on all of that today. Um, and Teal and AI have a great intersection here in this little product called Moxie, this little robot that you can buy. It's not cheap, it's about $900, but Moxie is an AI powered robot that will help your child from ages 5 to 10 work on all sorts of skills, academic skills, social skills, emotional skills. It can help your child with things like depression, anxiety, anger management. It can be a very therapeutic thing even though it's an AI robot. So if you're interested, I would certainly say go check this out. It's been on the market probably for, I'm going to say at least 3 years now that I know of. So it's not new, but this is definitely one direction that AI can go, that it bleeds over into our teal world of um, wholeness and self-management. It's also interest to me because in my marketing world, I work with social emotional learning clients who certainly care about this and getting this technology and curriculum to a lot of people, mainly through schools. But what we know as AI has been around for a long time. And what we talk about as AI has changed over time. So it's been 70 years, 70 plus years that we've been talking about the Turing test. Do you guys know what the Turing test is from Alan Turing? Yeah. And there are things that have passed the Turing test. And I would say that Chat GPT comes pretty close, actually. You can't just ask it anything, but you can ask it a lot of stuff, and you would swear that there's somebody on the other end talking to you. But we've
Pat,
had,
in case people didn't know what the Turing test is, can I try to take a stab at this? It's a
sure.
test to see whether a computer could pass for a human.
Right. So the original thought experiment was if you were at a keyboard and a screen and you started interacting with something or somebody on the other side of that screen, could you tell whether you were interacting with a human or with a computer? And if you can't tell that it's not a human, that's said to pass the Turing test. Actually, a couple of years ago, there was a course, I don't remember what course or where, but there was a college course where students had been interacting with a computer system through the email for their assignments for the entire semester, and they never knew and they couldn't tell.
Hmm.
And that was definitely a home run as far as the Turing test goes. I'm not going to go too far down this, but it's just good to know that DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Administration, which has funded a lot of things, including the internet, started funding AI at MIT the year I was born, so 60 years ago. In the 80s, we had these things called expert systems. They were also decision support systems. Those were called AI. We've had autonomous cars. We've been working on them since the mid 80s. We've had speech recognition and generation since the late 90s. And we've had computer programs that can beat the world's best chess players since the late 90s, too. So all of these things have been talked about as AI over time. And now we're using it in a different sense. But all of these were pretty limited though too. They weren't as available as AI is in our life today. So how did we get from this growing but limited sense of AI to AI is everywhere? I don't know if you noticed AI was all over the Super Bowl if you watched that football game last week. So how did we get there? Well, let's go dive into that for a moment. There's two things that really drove AI to where it is now. And one of those is just the growing power of computers. So we've talked about one of the co-founders of Intel has this thing called Moore's Law, that the power of computing will grow exponentially every 18 months. One way to look at that is how much computing power can you get for $1,000? And how does that change over time? So if you look at this logarithmic scale here, starting way back when, 1900, we had calculators. They were very mechanical, but they could do next to nothing. It wasn't until, maybe the 1980s that we had a brain in a computer for $1,000 that was the same as a brain in an insect. But it is definitely taking off. If you look here now, this blue line is roughly 2024 on this scale. We are pretty much at the point where you can buy the equivalent of a human brain in processing power for $1,000. Go down to Best Buy, pick up a brain. It's really that easy. Which is, it's great for doing AI. You need this level of computation. It's also a little scary to think about too. It's also not that far away when you look at the scale from one human brain to having $1,000 or at least an affordable computer that can match many brains, many millions of brains, many billions of brains. So this line is probably at like 2050. So 25 years from now is this next big leap. So if you think we've accelerated in the last 5 years, basically, hold on to your hats. You're going to see a lot more. So that's one aspect of why AI has taken off. The other aspect is just the amount of data. You need a lot of data to train an AI system. And that's always been a barrier before. If you look at the growth of data, and this is just the growth of data from 2010 until roughly now, it's just exploded. A lot of that has come, believe it or not, from having cell phones. The fact that we generate so much content, especially pictures, through our cell phones, and that's all available to AI systems. It all becomes something that you can train an AI for. So in this regard, in this year, 2024, we're estimated to add approximately 35 zettabytes of data to the world's repository of data. That's all the emails and documents and movies and pictures and whatever. You may not be familiar with the phrase zettabytes, but here's one way to put it. A zettabyte equals 1 trillion gigabytes. We've all seen gigabytes. So, but if you think about that $1,000 laptop, and if it came with a $500 gigabyte hard drive, you would need a laptop for every person in India and every person in China just to store 1 zettabytes worth of information. This year, we're going to generate 35 of those. So if you combine this scale with the growing computing power, you can see that AI has nowhere to go but up in terms of power.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
A question about data and diminishing returns.
Mm-hmm.
What you just described feels overwhelming. But also, how much more data does AI need? Like, are we not at saturation in terms of what an AI would need to learn what it needs to learn? Like, what's the point of all this data?
Right. Wow, that is a really good question. And just for the audience, we didn't rehearse that question. That's just Julia's brain. That's an amazing question. Well, there's a couple of thoughts. One, data can be something that can train AI. It can also be something that AI can act upon. And so if there's more data for it to act upon, there's more use cases for AI. So there's just going to be more opportunity. If we're generating data to train AI, that still involves a human effort in some types of AI because you have to go through and label the data. So an AI program knows what it is. So you train it on, this is a picture of a cat. and then go look at these pictures and find all the cats. Somebody has to sit down, and a human has to say, this is a cat, this isn't a cat, for it to understand. That's one type of AI, and we'll actually talk a little bit more about that. Does that answer your question without going too far down the rabbit hole?
I think so. The first part of your answer was interesting. Yeah, that there's like the more data there is, the more applications there are for an AI to treat that data somehow.
Right. Right.
But Erica seems to have a question.
Yes, and Frank as well.
Oh, and Frank as well. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. It's actually more of a comment that I mentioned this in my breakout group, but I used to work at Wikimedia Foundation, and we had similar questions about wikis showing up in the world across Wikipedias. And your question just kind of triggered in my mind this notion of bias in data. And so like 35 zettabytes of data, where is this data coming from? Is it all coming from like the northern hemisphere of the world? How much more data would it take to represent the rest of the world?
Right.
I think probably a lot.
Yeah, that is definitely, not every culture participates equally in technology, therefore they don't participate equally in data creation. Yeah, that is very, very good. True. Frank.
Yes, I'd like to echo on that and elaborate a little bit because, as you say, someone has to say this is a cat, this is not a cat, etc. And as I view it, we need much more. We need to involve many more people there, all around the world and in all kinds of spheres of life. And yes, I don't know so much about who's working for the tech companies, but as I understand from what I read, we also need more diversity in there. Yeah, what do you think about that? To make sure that we have sufficient equity and yeah,
Right.
and yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the two books I helped edit on AI were specifically on what's known as interpretable AI. There are ways to develop AI systems, specifically machine learning systems, to where you can, as a human, peer into the black box. You can find out how, excuse me, the AI system came up with its answer. So one specific use case we talked about was there are now AI systems that will decide whether you get a loan or not, credit rating AIs. And the bank needs to be able to explain to consumers, but also to regulators, how that decision was arrived at. Because a consumer has the right to say, I dispute whether my application was declined or not, tell me why. When there was a human doing it, the human could tell you that. If it's an AI system, you still need to be able to tell a human that. Great questions. Okay. So just what is AI today? I think generative AI gets a lot of the headlines today, and there's certainly that's going on with ChatGPT, with Dolly. If you saw the Super Bowl, Microsoft Copilot was one of the sponsors. Claude, I don't know if you guys have heard of Claude. Claude is a competitor to ChatGPT, was also advertising. I mean, to me, it was like, wow, there's cars and potato chips and AI. It's become a commodity. I never thought that I would see that. And I've been hanging around computers for most of my adult life. But AI takes a lot of other forms too. So, and in generative AI, you certainly need that labeled data that we talked about. Who's going to go through and say this is a picture of a cat? A lot of what we call AI today is machine learning as opposed to expert systems or whatever. There's types of machine learning. One is called supervised. That's where you tell it what the data is when you train it. But there's other types of AI, risk detection using voice. This was a company I worked with, is another type of supervised AI. They had a set of 300,000 responses from people all over the world, lots of different languages, accents, giving simple yes or no answers. And those were either honest answers or dishonest answers. So then they could use that to compare responses they get to things like insurance claims or credit applications. This came out of the military, speaking of DARPA, but they're now using it in the insurance industry. They're also going to be using it in sports for anti-doping and other sorts of cheating. There's a lot of use cases for this, very much powered by AI. There's also a type of AI that's called reinforcement learning. And this is where an AI system is connected to sensors and it's given a goal. And the AI system can change something in the environment, get data from the sensors, see if it's closer to the goal. If not, change something in the environment, check the sensors, and it can iterate this process. Google has been using this process to run the energy efficiency of their data centers. Data centers are huge suckers of energy. Google has been carbon neutral for quite a while. They care about energy. It's still a big cost for them. This is definitely a great use case, but if you're a facility manager or you're an energy efficiency manager at a company, this is kind of your job, right? It's changed dramatically because this sort of AI is out there. Then there's also shopping recommendations. When you're on Amazon and you see this recommendation of, hey, if you're buying let's say, I don't know why there's a laser toner there, but let's say you're buying a laser toner cartridge and it says, people who buy this laser toner cartridge also buy this Sony SD card and this Nikon camera. Maybe you'd be interested in that too. That's powered by AI. It's a different type of AI. There's no way to meaningfully label all that data necessarily. But what you can do is pool all that data together in what's known as unsupervised learning. And that's where you give machine learning a big bunch of data and it just separates things that are like other things. So in this case, you could give it, here's all the purchases of people who bought these laser toners. What are the top 3 things most populous that you found in all that data? Serve them up. No real labeling going on there, but it's very much an AI powered thing. So AI is definitely all around us. So what does this mean for Teal though? Where does this all take this for Teal? Well, one thing we found when we did our Teal landscape report is we looked at all the companies that we could find data on that in some way qualified as Teal. And the top 3 are very digitally driven: business consulting and services, information and software. Having your computer or your company pretty much live on computers makes it very easy to have AI be the next step for your company. And even if you're not in these top 3, lots of these other sectors are very technical and very digital. Healthcare, entertainment, professional services, financial services, utilities are all very digitally driven these days. So it gives Teal organizations a very high exposure to what AI might do for them or to them. We also, in our research, found a study from Pew Centers that says the workers who have a higher exposure to AI include those who are college educated, those with analytical jobs, and higher wage workers, which also fits especially those top 3 industries there. Those are very educated, analytical, high wage workers for the most part. Throughout history, I think people have feared AI and automation as coming for all their manual jobs. And all the professional people thought, I'm smart, I'll never be replaced. And that's been completely turned on its head. I've already heard a couple comments in our discussions about AI is like a friend. It's like a child. It's another person that I interact with. And that is absolutely the case. Imagine this robot in your break room coming to make coffee, not for itself. It doesn't drink coffee, but you could train your robot companion here to go get you coffee. That used to be sexist. I don't know what we'd call it now, but it's still not good necessarily. But this robot is made from a company called Figure.ai. BMW is going to be using these robots in their automotive assembly plant in South Carolina. So this is a case where robots are coming for manual labor. And, you know, the great thing about them is they can work around the clock. They don't get sick. Sometimes they break down maybe, but definitely better than a human. They don't get bored doing the same thing 24 hours a day. Tesla has a similar one that they're going to be trying to get into similar spaces. Boston Dynamics has Atlas, which has probably been the most famous. You know, it's been on 60 Minutes more than once. They have videos of dancing robots. They're the people who make Spot, the little dog robot. They're also training their robot for automotive assembly work. It's kind of crazy. But most of this is on a computer still. And AI, as especially I think Erica pointed out, AI is like, it's a new person on your team. It's somebody that you interact with. You have to train it. You have to supervise it. We also talked about you not only have to train it with data. Erica's trying to train ChatGPT to be polite, socialized, friendly, you know, say thank you and please, and know these sorts of very human things. Computers are still infinitely dumb and infinitely patient. This is what we used to say in the IT world. They'll do exactly what you tell them to do forever until you stop them. AI is still that way. I mean, you can give it bad questions and it will give you bad answers. It will work on bad projects as well as good projects as much as you want. In that way, it hasn't really changed. But what we're asking it to do is, for example, I was recently talking with a colleague of mine who works for Salesforce, and he writes sales and marketing material. We've been colleagues for a long time in that regard. He told me that his team is now required to generate their first draft of anything using ChatGPT. They cannot do it any other way. And to me, that fundamentally changes the nature of what it means to be a writer in corporate America. You are now more of an editor. You're more of an evaluator. You're reflecting, you're discerning, you're strategizing and intuiting how this output from somebody else moves you closer to what you're trying to achieve. That is, that's a very different job. You still have to be able to write, but more than that, you have to be able to collaborate and know what good writing is and understand the goals. It's a big difference. My colleague is not optimistic about continued work for our sorts in the corporate world. They are actually applying to graduate school to go be a mental health counselor, which could be good, but if you remember Moxie back at the beginning of the presentation, that could be, I don't know, maybe there's still some time in that regard. We'll see. Well, let's go on. How am I doing for time? Okay, I'm doing all right for time. So now that Teal and AI are meeting because they're both very digital, where are people ending up with this? I got this from an Accenture survey. So the C-suite and workers are not connecting on this. So in the workforce, workers feel like they understand the technology. 82% agreed with, I understand AI technology. But the C-suite says lack of understanding is a concern for their staff. That's 30, a third of C-suite people don't think their workers can do this. Workers also say they're very confident they can learn the skills needed to leverage generative AI, 94%. Whereas that same roughly third say lack of worker skills is going to hold their organization back. This is a huge disconnect. On the work itself, workers are very insecure about what generative AI is going to do to their job. 58% say it's increasing their job insecurity. Whereas 30% of CEOs say, it's, it's a concern, but that means there's 70% that say I don't think our people are worried about generative AI. That seems to me a very big disconnect as well. And then workers say that they're concerned that generative AI may increase their stress and burnout. That's 60%. Whereas C-suite says 37% generative AI could contribute to people's stress and burnout. It's just major mismatches here that people aren't understanding. To me, some of this comes back to self-management, right? If you're going to give more power to the people actually doing the work, you're going to hear a different view of AI than what the C-suite says about it, since they are in some ways detached from that work. And I'll be honest, this whole discussion, this whole presentation kind of started with this report that I saw about investments in artificial technology. And it was specifically this quote from the abstract. AI investments are associated with a flattening of the firm's hierarchical structure, with significant increases in the share of workers at the junior level and decreases in shares of workers in middle management and senior roles. NBER is not really known as cutting edge people. These are the stuffy academic economists who tell us whether we've had a recession or not. That's kind of their claim to fame. But if even they are seeing this, then to me, that's a big signal that this is having a major impact out in the world. So what are we going to do about all of this? I think the first thing to do is to lean into holism, or wholeness, as we called it earlier. Because AI has become a commodity, it's now in the Super Bowl next to Fritos and Chevys. Our humanness now has to be our differentiator and our strength. You can't outcompete your other organizations in your market because you have AI, because they have it too, and it costs $20 a month. So what are you going to do instead? Even back in 2015, in a Forbes magazine article, Dov Seidman talked about this coming future. And he said, there are unique human qualities that only people possess, like the ability to engage in collaboration and communication, or to display grit. Today, your people and their behaviors are your strategy. I think that was probably true 9 years ago. I think it's even more true today. Frank, you have a hand up.
Yeah, I'm curious to know how you define the purpose of AI or Gen AI, to be more concrete. As I view it, it's like, but still we have this thinking about efficiency and control in our minds, that it sort of goes on to AI, that AI is there to make everything more efficient, more effective, and optimize.
Right.
How do you view that?
Well, I'll expand the quote. I took one sentence or two sentences out of the quote. The quote actually starts, "There is no war between man and machine coming. The machines have already won. Instead of competing with them or trying to maintain supremacy in skills like quantitative analysis, we have to complement them."
Mm-hmm.
And then this is where this quote kicks in. And then it closes with, "It's not enough to just provide business with a human face. Business needs to infuse humanity down to its core." So I think, and we did have a slide in here about choosing your right AI opportunity. I think you do have to ask, what is the role of this new, very technical persona on my team or in my organization? What can it do best? And if it's taken over duties, what does that now allow us to do if it's taken on this new role? I'm not sure that having AI write your first draft of everything is necessarily the best use of AI. That's not a choice I would make, but that's the choice that Salesforce has made. That's a purpose that they've given generative AI, is to set a baseline for creative output. I think something like the Google energy efficiency is much more aligned with what AI can do and what people can't do. That's a scalable, daunting job that has a very high impact that needs to be done 24/7 without mistakes. So, yeah, I think those are hard questions that people have to ask about how are we going to use this technology.
Yeah, Matt, if you don't mind,
Mhm.
a little bit of devil's advocate, I suppose.
Mhm.
I love what Dove has said, and on my good days, I agree with him. And my breakout group knows that today I'm a little bit cynical. And given my cynical disposition at the moment, I can also imagine that as we move forward, the way to complement an AI that essentially does all of our hard thinking for us is to become more insular, is to have fewer of us on a team and therefore farther apart from one another. And rather than complementing with holism, we complement with higher barriers and thicker walls, and just interact with the AI. Why even interact with one another? The AI is the glue that holds us together. I don't want to believe, but I do fear.
I think there are certainly people who are going to say, how much can I give to this AI thing because it's far cheaper than a human. And so that's what I'm going to do. I would like to think that there's organizations that will say humans still drive the agenda. They still set the vision and the strategy. They still own things I'm going to talk about in a minute. Out of that, what's best offloaded to AI versus what's best continued with a human? That's the model I'd like to see, but there's no guarantee that that's going to happen, to your point, or happen universally.
Yeah.
Matt, can I jump in with an
Yeah.
example that from our own team that might shed some light here?
Mhm.
I meant one of the things that we're thinking about, Matt mentioned the Teal landscape map that we published some months ago that kind of try to show all the Teal organizations in the world as we find them, and we're learning more and more. And so this V2 that we're working on, we're actually tapping AI. We're setting up some questions for AIs to go and find possible evidence of a Teal organization in terms of their public statements, their websites, so that we're going to do a better combing of the world. And then part of me was like, wait, I thought that's what we're going to do. Like, I was like a little bit sad and feeling obsolete that, like, what about all the networks that we've got going, and with folks like MJ and Leah, we're learning who's out there. And what I realized though is that it's allowing us to put that more human face on this research and this project, because now we have more time to reach out to the leaders or the members of those organizations and actually connect human to human, and say what are some ways we can support each other. So it's how can we deepen this community, accelerate this movement. And that goes back to what you said about the spirit of collaboration and the grit. Like, how many times will we ping them on LinkedIn or wherever else?
Right.
So I have a little bit more of that hopeful side of things. I lean on the hopeful side, given that Julia is such a cynic. So anyways, I think that was an example that was telling to me, because I had that same reaction of fear for my job. I'm obsolete, and now I'm feeling more excited about the more person-to-person work ahead.
Yeah. In the automation world, they talk about offloading work that is dull, dirty, or dangerous. And certainly that sort of crawling the internet looking for specific data is dull. It's dull work. I mean, you can nerd out a little bit on it, but after a while, you just need a break. That's great stuff for an AI to do if we can get it to do it the right way. See also the infinitely dumb, infinitely patient, right? If we give it bad directions, it's just going to go do bad things for us. I would add to that, in the age of AI, we can give AI tasks that are daunting, that are either so big in scale or require such speed response that humans can't do it. I think that's another thing where you can find purpose for AI in your organization. And if AI is doing that, that frees you up to do these other things like Ed mentioned. Go have those human connections. I like to call those things that humans still get to do in this age, human algorithms. You know, the AI has its own algorithms of supervised learning, unsupervised learning, reinforcement learning, those sorts of things. Humans still have a lot of algorithms. We have empathy, we have curiosity, we have motivation, strategy, novelty, divergence, inspiration. These are all things, I think I have one more here, imagination. These are all things that it's going to be very hard for a computer to do, but they're very necessary for organizations or communities to take on. I don't see that we're going to be outclassed in this anytime soon. When I put on my hat as an audiobook narrator, one thing I tell people is virtual voice AI can't have empathy for what's going on in the story. It has nothing to draw upon. So it can recite a text, but it can't relate to it. And to me, that's the difference. And that's, as long as people care about that in their narrations, that makes me hopeful for humans still doing that. I still think there's a place for virtual voices. My best use case is the news. A news report comes out, it needs to be accessible to everybody, and it needs to be narrated right now. So let's let an AI do that. That's a daunting thing, right? Humans couldn't turn that around fast enough. Leah has a question.
Well, what you just said is my greatest hesitation about AI, and that is that people will forget the difference. To me, it's not good to teach an AI to say please and thank you. Not at all. That helps to blur the difference. When people get emotionally invested in what is basically a machine, that's very dangerous.
Interesting. I can see that point.
There, excuse me, there's one other but it escapes me at the moment. I'll think of it later.
Okay, you can always chime back in.
Yeah.
So if we have these human algorithms in our organizations, emphasizing those impacts all aspects of how we manage the people in our organizations, not the technical personas, but it changes your job description. Just like, you know, I talked about my friend at Salesforce. His job description changed because AI showed up. Changes who you hire, changes your team composition. There's now this AI persona on there. It changes what you coach and train people to do. It changes how you measure that performance. It changes how you nurture and promote people or give them new responsibilities or recognition for what they've done. It changes the field there from technical skills to human skills, in my opinion. So that's one thing we can do is lean into holism. Leah, did you remember?
Yes.
Okay.
I remember it, and that is that if you think of Teal as a management paradigm or something, there can be a lot of comparisons and the way you're doing here. But Teal is actually a worldview. Only humans have worldviews. It is the entirety of one's identity and reality. And it's a stage in the evolution of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So when we understand what Teal fundamentally is, then the relationship with AI changes again.
Yeah, great point. Great point.
Thanks.
I think the next thing we can do with Teal and AI is really make friends with self-management. This has been a tough thing, I think, for a lot of Teal interested organizations to actually do is how do you move the way you operate from this hierarchy that has been just ingrained in us to self-management. I think if you're an individual contributor, you're going to have to accept that there's going to be fewer managers to support you if your managers have been supporting you at all. As we saw with that NBER report, that AI is hollowing out the ranks of middle management. And so you're going to be more on your own. That's going to push individual contributors farther towards self-management. It also means it's going to push individual contributors more towards their own intrinsic motivations and about both what their role is in general and their career overall. They're going to have to be more responsible for that and make sense of this new world with AI. For middle managers, certainly I think it's a time to, again, embrace self-management, try and get out of the way of individual contributors, given that they have more capabilities. They're going to be doing different things now that AI has come along. It's also not good that AI is hollowing out the ranks of middle management, according to NBER. So if this is you, if you live in middle management, it may be time to think about what's the new human value that I can be bringing to my organization. Or maybe you don't want to be a manager. There are plenty of managers who don't want to be managers. That's about 20% from what I could find, who moved into middle management because they just got promoted, they'd been at the company long enough, or it was the only way for them to get a raise, or they felt like they had to because there was no other path for them. Certainly those folks can hopefully find a different role in this AI world. And if you're a senior leader, by all means, let managers stop being managers if they don't want to be them anymore, and don't look down on them for that. For a lot of time in a lot of places, if you took yourself out of management, that was almost career suicide. Like, how could you do that? I think we're going to see more of that as we need fewer middle managers and more self-managed teams empowered by AI. I think you should still keep the people that you felt valuable enough to be managers. Don't demote them, don't fire them unless you really don't want them or need them. But I think you'll be losing a lot of experience that way. And then finally, I think organizations who are impacted by AI really need to get back to the topic of evolving purpose. And Frank talked about this a little bit. What's the purpose of AI? I think for individuals, they need to ask, what is my human algorithm? What is my human value in this world? If portion of my job or much of my job has been taken over by AI, what can I bring to the party now? Frank, you have more thoughts?
Yeah, I asked that question because I was thinking, as you were speaking, I was thinking about social media.
Mhm.
And, that word social, as I understand it, that was what it was designed to do. But what happened? Something else happened. I mean, as I see it, it's a lot about broadcasting, and the social aspect is coming too short in comparison with the intentions we had. How do you view that?
Being human at scale is hard. I think the people who do social media well, especially in the corporate or organizational social media space, they still put the social in social media. They still reach out to people. They still listen. They still engage. It's not just a one-way, one-to-many broadcast channel. One example I had recently, hang on, I will pull this out of my head. I just had one of these encounters. Heck, who was it? Oh, it was my tea. So I drink a lot of Bigelow tea, and I've had one version of Bigelow tea recently where 3 of my tea bags fell apart in my mug, and tea was just everywhere. It was the same kind 3 times in a row, not good. So I got on their website and I tried to fill out their form. Their form was a little janky. I wasn't sure that the information got through. So then I went to Facebook, put the same information in there. Hey, you guys got a problem. And to Bigelow's credit, I heard back from them in email and on Facebook, acknowledging the problem, asking for more data. There's a code on the box that they needed. They offered to send me a coupon for a new box of tea, which I don't really need. I mean, come on, it's $3. But the thing is, they responded. They were social on social media. They were quick about it too. So it shows me that you can still do it, but it takes effort and it takes people, right? I'm not sure an AI could have had that. Maybe it could. I'm not sure an AI could have had that discussion with me. I think there's just cheap senior leaders out there who don't want to invest in people doing the people thing. That's going to have to change, right? If AI is taking over jobs, we have to let people do their human algorithms, which include empathy. And that's what was on display there. For organizations and purpose, if the value you provided was very dependent on people, whether that's manual labor or brain power, and AI is going to impact that, it's time to consider what's the purpose of your organization now. You're going to have to come up with something new because you're going to be, your price point is going to be eroded and you're going to face increasing competition if AI is a commodity, right? If somebody else can enter your space with an AI that's cheaper than your people and do the same job or better, that kind of blows up your business model. It's time for you to think about evolving your purpose. I know these are super scary things for individuals and organizations to talk about, but I don't think you can avoid it anymore. And I think if you try to avoid it, you're going to have even scarier conversations such as, hey, we didn't invest in this and now company X is eating our lunch because they're using AI and people the right way. I'm going to have to lay you off. That's a crappy discussion to have. So where do we go from here? I think the main thing is organizations that are already practicing are moving towards holism and self-management and evolutionary purpose, the things we've talked about as being key to responding to AI, are actually the ones that have environments primed for doing AI right. They're ready to take on this tough conversation and hard transition to having this whole new class of people on your team or personas on your team. That's where I think we need to go from here.